So just continuing our discussion here and presentation of different experiences and sites that we're dealing with in Poland, I wanted to share with you a few examples, actually 2 examples of activities that we're doing in Wrocław, and that are actually connected to our thinking of human rights and how can we expand from looking at the Jewish history of our city that can draw to that the theme of today's educational approach and also memorial sites. So the mission of our foundation is taking care of the Jewish heritage of the pre-war part of the history of our city, when it was German city of Breslau and today the Polish city of Wrocław. The foundation was also created together with the descendants of the Jewish families from the pre-war Breslau. And what I wanted to tell you very briefly, the story of the Gwarna Jewish cemetery, or the pre-war name, the Klasenstraße Friedhof, which is a Jewish cemetery now located in the city center of Wrocław. What you see here is the main railway station and a bird's eye view over one of the quarter of the city, and the very triangular shape here that is tracing back the 18th century Jewish cemetery that our foundation actually is working with from the beginning. This is what united different activists and researchers and the descendants around this cause of looking at the today's fabric of the city and asking questions why the cemetery is forgotten or hidden. And the story of the cemetery and its destruction is actually pointing to the gradual deprivation of civil rights and human rights, and ultimately to the Holocaust and disappearance of the Jewish community that can no longer take care of the cemetery in this case. So our activism is actually looking also at the research and archival research to really document that site. I think that's something maybe was mentioned already before in all the work that we're doing, and with the sites that we're dealing with. This is very often a point of departure, an important point of conversation for those also who disagree. How should we treat the site, or what it should remember, and what story we should tell? The site, the map you're looking at is from 1908, when the cemetery started to be already cut into pieces due to the urban development. And here we have a photo of the area with a dense trees covering the site of the cemetery. So in the process of thinking of the site and how it looks today, and we can still see this kind of triangular shape, we really wanted to understand who was buried there or still is, because that's another part of the story, that human remains, which is also something that is a uniting point for different sites that we represent here, are still buried in the ground. There were some exhumations made to the site of the Gwarna cemetery, but not to all the area. And now the main part we are actually dealing with is the courtyard, the area that is covered by the courtyard and the sports field, built in the 60s. The cemetery, the memory of the cemetery still exists in the city planning. So what you see here is the spatial development plan from the year 2000, which actually foresees a sort of commemoration or green commemoration of the area, to remember and to respect the burial site, the Jewish burial site. However, until today, this part, which still contains some human remains, has not been realized. And we're looking only at the small triangular part that I showed you before. Sorry, it's here, that actually was implemented. So in our role, and I won't go too maybe too in details more into the cemetery and the story. I will just focus more on the mission and the future we wanted to envision and the questions we're asking. But I'll paste later in the chat a link to our website where you can read more about the cemetery and the research. But part of our role is also to be there on the site, to check on the site, to talk to the residents, to build sort of community and engagement and understanding on what's the history of this place and what is happening there now. And Magda mentioned before difficult heritage and some sort of features that those kind of places have. And what you're looking at is exactly the Gwarna Jewish Cemetery, which actually now serves as a construction site, or a site of an office of a construction office for a company building something else on that street. So it raises the questions, why does it have to be this way? Also, the trees that were there for many years were cut down recently. And our foundation is also reporting to the residents the state of the matter about the area and maybe a potential future for it. So the site is actually now inaccessible, closed and fenced. The courtyards are closed and not in use for many years. That's our report from cutting down the trees. And what we managed to do throughout the 3 years of our activities is to at least mark the fragments of the borders of the cemetery. This is the cemetery wall before and after the intervention, and also organizing walks and taking the very strong educational approach. So whenever there's some sort of commemoration, this is also again Anna Shapiro, who also came to Wrocław to mark those fragments of the cemetery borders here in another place with natural pigments, making it also a very temporary exhibition. But also, then the second time we did it of refreshment this year, and it was with a group of volunteers, which also taught us how important it is to engage people, local residents, whoever is interested in that process of learning about the history, commemorating, and maybe repeating that commemorative act every year. Together with that commemoration, we were able to put 2 information boards in those 2 places. The orange dots are actually pointing to those fragments of the cemetery borders that we were able to mark and give the context. And that was very successful, because we've been observing people passing, that just this information out there in the city, which was really missing since the destruction of the cemetery, basically, gave us also more power, or in the conversation with the city authorities, to really take the next step. So the information and the temporary exhibition or marking of the site, but maybe let's think of one step more, and in that context, maybe more permanent commemoration of the site, and thinking of a memorial or a green park. And here are the results of a survey that we did also with a group of volunteers, asking different groups of stakeholders, but mainly also residents who live around, what would they imagine? Do they agree to commemorate that place? And most of them pointed to the green commemorations, some sort of park and greenery that would mark that space. Going into I know we don't have
Yes, this is the time where I come in and say,
yes,
1 more minute.
Yes, so in that 1 minute, I'll jump ahead. So here's the analysis we had. So we really start with the past to understand what's happening in the present, but imagining what could happen in the future. And here's just a few, very tentative slides of our designers. And it's one of the many possibilities that could happen in that area, instead of this neglected and kind of forgotten site that is used by construction. The city to have a park that actually tells the story of the Jewish community of pre-war Breslau. That is a place, a welcoming place, a green place, a place of contemplation, but also of respect for human remains, but also friendly for the residents. So this is the view from the blocks of flats surrounding the area, offering parking spaces. And finally, jumping to the idea and the questions we're asking. So what are we eventually teaching in that space, making it a park, but maybe also an educational pavilion, and taking the examples, for instance, of Willi Kohn, a Jewish historian of Breslau, Jewish-German historian, and his family, who documented how the civic rights were taken away from the Jewish community gradually throughout the 30s and the Nazis. And this testimony, and his testimony of how it happened in Breslau, was a very important story for different processes of and how the human rights violations happen. So this is one of the questions we're asking ourselves. If we manage to make justice for Gwarna Jewish Cemetery, that's one of the angles that we could take to speak about his experience, but also about the Jewish life that was in the city before. And I don't think I have time to talk to you about the second initiative that opens up. Ola, tell me if I should stop here.
No, I think we should stop here and maybe we will have time to bring
Excellent.
it up in the discussion.